I'm David Poole. I'm an Executive Director for Commercial and Procurement at Highways England, and I'm also our Executive Lead for Equality and Diversity. So I think there's a valid question just to start. Why are you the Executive Lead for Equality and Diversity? It's not my specialist field. I'm not a HR professional by background, so why am I leading on it? And the reason for that is because I think it's tremendously important. I think it needs to be, our reaction to it and our response to it needs to be embedded in every part of the business. And San and myself, Sam was just talking just half an hour ago, San and myself debated that point and said we could do this kind of traditionally, have it as objective number 6 for the HR director, and we'll kind of achieve a business as usual level of focus. And actually it's way more important than that for our business and in particular for our supply chain. Because there are so many more people in our supply chain that work for us than work for Highways England directly. So that's why I lead on it, and I really feel passionately that we need to make a difference and change our industry. So, taking the EDI challenge and opportunity seriously. 3 things to think about why I think we should take it really seriously. First of all, legal obligation. This is the law. Because Highways England spends public money, we come under the remit of the Public Sector Equality Duty. And that means not only do we, but all of our suppliers and our entire supply chain do too. If you read the clauses carefully in our contracts, then it's absolutely clear that that is a roll-down obligation on our suppliers. And if you read the Public Sector Equality Duty, the Act, the duties under that are really quite clear, specific, and actually pretty demanding as well. So we have to do this, and I think it's tremendously important that we do too. The second point is this is the right thing to do. And I think most people who are really working on the equality and diversity agenda at some point have gone through a pivot point in their understanding and their commitment to this agenda. Duncan Elliott was here from Carillion talking earlier, and he described that point during conversation with Nikki Ensert, who works for Highways England. For me, it was when I looked at some of the apprentice data that relates to construction, apprenticeships in construction. And broadly, this related to people who had all passed the entry-level requirements, and the data was a reflection of how successful they were in achieving an apprenticeship within the construction supply chain. And the bottom line is, if you're white and male, you're pretty much 100% guaranteed to get an apprenticeship if you pass the minimum level requirement. And if you're female, you've got significant disadvantage. And if you're from a BME background, you've got an even bigger disadvantage. And I don't think that's okay. So that was my pivot moment when I thought, get on and do something, Paul. You can make a difference, and that's why we really embedded it so hard in our business and in our procurement processes. And the third point is really, this is good business. There is lots of evidence around that about why it might be good business, and I'll just point out 3 of the kind of the highlights. In terms of talent pool, there's lots of evidence that says if your recruitment processes go fishing in a small, same pool all of the time, you are missing out on significant amount of talents. And in an industry where we are struggling with capacity and capability because of the ramp up in infrastructure investment, that's a missed opportunity. The second point is about innovation. There is really good evidence that businesses that have a diverse workforce drawing in from a diverse set of backgrounds are better able to innovate. And in our business and our industry, with the challenges we have ahead of us, I'm really interested in businesses who can innovate more quickly than their competitors. So it's a significant competitive advantage. And then San alluded to it earlier, actually, for those of you who are here, is diversity is a great insulation and insurance against groupthink. Large groups of people who have all come from the same background, been working together for a long period of time, are susceptible to groupthink. Go and look up Enron for a great example of where that can lead. That's a really dangerous thing in big industries with big important responsibilities to the country like ours. We cannot afford to have that. So I think it's great insulation insurance about that. And finally, if none of those things gets your bag, then actually the third point why this is good business is because it gives you competitive advantage. I am changing, and we are changing our procurement process so that equality and diversity moves up the agenda in terms of how that, and you'll hear other stories about how other big infrastructure clients are doing that. So it will give you a competitive advantage. I'm just going to reflect now back on Highways England's 3 imperatives. We have 3 core imperatives: safety, customer service, and delivering our investment programme. And across all of these, diversity and inclusion gives our suppliers an advantage and gives us an advantage. Across the first of them, on safety, there's good evidence from both the Olympics and from Crossrail that having diverse teams leads to safer working. You can think about the dynamics of how that works, but the evidence is there. It works. In terms of customer, there's lots of evidence out there, and we're starting to gather our own understanding around this, that says businesses with a diverse workforce have a better understanding of their customer need and are more open to asking themselves open questions about whether they really understand that customer need and what's required. So it's against our second imperative, diversity is a real advantage. And on the third thing, I think I've addressed this already actually, in terms of delivering the RIS, that huge amount of work that we have got ahead of us and the doubling of capital investment that we have to deliver over the next 2 or 3 years, capacity and capability is going to be a real and live issue for us and in our supply chain. And diversity and inclusion really sets you apart in that, as Sam covered earlier on. So our commitment to EDI within Highways England runs through and through. We've put it as an overarching objective, and I own this within our business. We report on it every year as part of the public sector equality duty, but we don't just pay lip service to it. If you read our report, you get a real context, texture, and flavour for what we're actually trying to do. And this isn't just about changing the procurement questions and hit and hope that it'll all be all right. We are driving real change. The CLEAR project that San alluded to earlier, we took part in ourselves, and we have really changed our recruitment processes on the back of that. That was a joint project with a number of our supply chain partners, and we've shared the findings. It's all there. If you look on our supplier portal, you can pull down the findings from that report and about how we are changing our recruitment processes. And for our supply chain, we hope that our supply chain will use that and start to change their recruitment processes too. So we're kind of in it for the long term. I'll just move on to kind of the subject of the presentation, which is what's this got to do with procurement. The reason I've spent time talking the way that I have and just left procurement to the last slide is that I really think that this needs to be embodied in the businesses within our supply chain as a whole business change. There is so far that the procurement process can encourage you and the supply chain towards change, but if it's not really embedded, then it's always going to feel kind of hard work. So on this chart, the items in blue particularly, we can, through the procurement process, put encouragements, levers, spikes, whatever you want to call it, that encourage businesses to change in this way. We can put requirements around how our suppliers deal with customers and communities. Our START process, which is all about strategic alignment and pre-qualification, very much focuses on EDI now. We can ask for certain commitments in terms of capacity and capability, in terms of tenders and procurement returns, and we can ask for commitments, and we do ask for commitments around apprentices. All of that, our suppliers can deliver on and write great tender submissions that address all of these points. But if they aren't doing the other elements too, then it will always feel like hard work, I think. And the purple elements are the bits that I think businesses really need to pick up and embrace within their own leadership teams to really drive diversity and inclusion into their own businesses. It needs some real leadership. In the way that I stepped up and said, hold on a second, Sam, we're going to really lead on this as a business across our leadership team. You need to look at your own recruitment processes, and we know that's hard. We've been through that pain, and that's why we've shared the report that CLEAR did for ourselves. We shared it on our supplier portal so everybody can see on it, and see it and learn from it. And the final thing is innovation. We can ask certain questions around innovation in the procurement process, but really, if innovation is going to be the heart of your business and you're going to leverage a diverse workforce in that, then that needs to come from the leadership team within the business too. So we are, just in summary, Highways England is absolutely committed to equality and diversity. We are committed to using our start process to help align our suppliers for the long-term journey. And we are using our procurement process to advantage those suppliers who are working actively on diversity and inclusion. That rolls forward then into how we measure performance on contracts during the in-contract and construction phases. We are absolutely pushing on with all of those things, but to be really successful in this, your leadership teams in the supply chain need to embrace it so it becomes embedded in your business.
Is this, you can hear me? Great, lovely. So I'm going to spend about 10 minutes talking to you about the HS2 approach to EDI in the supply chain. I'll kind of stick tightly to that subject. Congratulations to all of you here who I understand are graduating from the Jacobs course today. So, what is HS2? Let's see if this works. Next. There we go. So HS2 is the new high-speed rail that will be running from London to the north of the country. Will finish in around 2033. We'll be in Birmingham by about 2026. And we've recently completed quite a large amount of large tendering, which gives us a really good opportunity to say to organizations that actually, let's be clear, infrastructure is 20 years behind around diversity and inclusion. And we don't have time for slow change because we've got talent gaps, we've got skill gaps, we've got massive investment in all areas of infrastructure, and we just don't have time for the slow progress. Doing the same thing and expecting a different result has not worked for 20 years, and it will not work now. So, what are we going to do about it? The first thing that, I'll go back one slide. The first thing that's really key is that the difference between winning and losing a major procurement at HS2 is around 3%. It's a difference between first and second. The weighting that we give to EDI and skills is more than 3%. So you could actually say it's almost impossible to win a major contract at HS2 without putting some effort, some thought into diversity, inclusion, skills, education, and employment. Now, I don't know about you, but I've never met the business development manager yet that walks into the board and says, do you know what? We were going to bid for that £2 billion contract, but we can't be bothered to do that because of this diversity stuff. That conversation, I don't think, happens. If it does happen, I'm pretty sure the person leaves their job really quickly. So we have the opportunity to provide the funding to change, and that's our HS2 message. The sector is getting paid to change, and change is what we expect, not the same thing done over and over and over again. But it's easy to say, and how do you get there? Well, the first thing is we're very clear with our supply chain. We're very clear about our expectations. It's not rocket science, and this is the way that we explain it to our supply chain.
Hello. Looking to do business with HS2? To help us design and build the UK's most advanced railway, we need companies of all shapes and sizes, from small to medium-sized enterprises with a few employees to giant multinationals. At HS2, we passionately believe in delivering equality, diversity, and inclusion, and we expect all the businesses we work with to do so too. So you'll need to understand the equality, diversity, and inclusion policies and practices we've put in place. And show us yours too. Here's what you need to do. Firstly, you need to develop EDI plans that cover all the criteria. And you need to demonstrate how this works in practice. Do you attract and employ a diverse range of people who have different skills, experiences, and ways of thinking? And can you show how you achieve this? What training is available to your staff? Can you show how you monitor this? How do you communicate your achievements to your own employees and the outside world? What plans do you have in place to continually review and improve your own EDI policy? Doing these things won't push anyone out of your company or cost you lots to put in place. But those of you able to do these will have an edge over companies that don't. And this can make the difference between winning a contract with HS2 or not. No matter how big or small your company is, what we expect you to deliver will be relative to your size. With bigger companies leading by example and helping smaller companies in their supply chain develop good EDI practices. So what are you waiting for? Isn't it time you got on board?
Great. The little books that you saw in that video represent the mandatory requirements in the HS2 contracts around diversity and inclusion. But we just don't tell people to do things and expect them to change overnight. We help our organizations to make that change, to make that shift. Up here is an example of one of those tools. It's the HS2 EDI Tableau dashboard, which is publicly available. You can select any local authority area anywhere along the HS2 route, and it automatically updates to give you the diversity demographics, the socioeconomic demographics. You can combine areas, and it gives you comparisons to the national average. Why? Because our contractors told us finding relevant data was difficult. Well, it's not difficult anymore. It's right here. And we don't just give these to our contractors. We have them in databases, infographic maps. We even give our contractors EDI games, such as crosswords and word searches that they can play with their teams. We give them consultancy advice. We demonstrate how we have changed our recruitment process and pioneered a new way of recruiting called blind auditioning, which has had a stunning effect on diversity metrics. So it's not about beating people over the head and telling them you will do or you're in trouble. It's about helping them get there. And we've seen some great success. Arup, one of our Tier 1 contractors, became the first engineering firm in the UK to achieve the National Equality Standard, a direct result of working with HS2 and our inclusive procurement requirements. Green Park, the executive search firm, probably best known as the best diversity search firm in the UK, achieved a AAA accessible website as a result of working with HS2 and our requirements. LM is one of our JVs who are working towards an accreditation at the moment. So it's not impossible to make this change. You can support your supply chain to get there, and the fact is that it seems to be working quite well at the moment. Now, I gave this talk at RailTex a while ago, and I don't know if any of you saw the comments, but there was some quite heated debate on what I said, particularly around SMEs and how they would perform. And the evidence is showing that SMEs are doing really, really well. It's not difficult for SMEs to do this. They're actually more nimble. They can change quickly. And so I'll give you an example of how SMEs are currently performing in our supply chain.
We're a 7th generation family business. We've been growing trees and shrubs here in Horncastle in Lincolnshire since 1798. HS2 announced the biggest ever government contract for the advanced procurement of trees. 7 million trees, something like 650 hectares, which is huge. This project is a once-in-a-generation opportunity. And so I went to HS2 roadshows and to local business group meetings where there was an HS2 speaker to learn as much as I possibly could about HS2 values and how to align ourselves with those. When we received the pre-qualification questionnaire, there were all sorts of issues that we had to deal with, but one was EDI. And we were a little bit horrified by that because we had no idea what EDI meant. It wasn't an acronym that we used in our everyday business. So we had to look it up, and it means equality, diversity, and inclusion. We're a relatively small business, and we didn't have an EDI policy in place. We sat down and said, well, we've got no chance now. That's going to eliminate us from this competition effectively. To win the big infrastructure project like that, we had to leave no stone unturned.
It was my job to implement the EDI policies at Crowders. Very scary at the beginning, but once we got into it, it was quite easy to implement. We broke it down into different sections, looked at what was equality, diversity and inclusion. We looked at the demographics, the age breakdown of our staff. We looked at disability, we looked at ethnicity, we looked at sexuality, we looked at what staff we employed, what staff we retained. So we were already doing about 75% of EDI without even knowing we were doing it. We just hadn't formalised it. To implement the EDI policy, we looked at government bodies, we looked at local authorities. You look at what you've already got, do some gap analysis on what demographics, what information you already have, maybe just within your own payroll system, and then go on the internet, take some advice from ACAS or from another advisory service and decide what you need to put into place. Myself and one of my directors decided to take a formal training course. It was very useful, it was very informative and very enlightening. I think particularly for the small companies like ours, HS2 had made us realise where we were lacking, so we have a 2-year plan in place now.
Health and safety is an absolute given with HS2, but then along comes quality management systems, environmental management systems, SEE, skills, education and employment, EDI and all these other values. And I think the concept of HS2 is to raise the standard of businesses that are engaging with them at whatever stage in the supply chain. And if we're an example of that, then it's actually working. It really is working because we have raised our standards of practices in all these areas of the HS2 values.
I think HS2 are doing a great thing educating lots of different companies that would never have got involved in these types of policies, whether it's the EDI or the SEE. From a personal point of view, it's absolutely great for me because I'm a working mum. I work full time, but my hours aren't conventional. From a business point of view, it's made us much better. It's made us focus more on the gaps that we have within the business, and I think moving forward it can only make the company better.
Great. It's not just a matter of telling people to do things. You also have to eat your own dog food. And when I first said that expression in one of our staff meetings, I got that dubious look right there. That's from Marnie, one of our transport people. But the great thing is, and it's nice because last year we were out talking about we will. Now we can talk about we have. We mirror the requirements on our supply chain. HS2 has doubled its spend with diverse suppliers, SMEs, and micro businesses in the last year, from just over 4 million to over 8 million. It's not difficult, it is possible. We've achieved Disability Confident Level 2, AA Web Accessibility Accreditation. We've won 5 EDI awards in the last 18 months. We've pioneered new methods of recruitment, one called blind auditioning, which removes CVs and applications entirely and caused a jump for women in shortlisting from 17% to 47%, and ethnic minorities from 14% to 50%, all based on your skill and ability to do the job, not your CV. So we have set out stringent requirements for the supply chain, and we know they can be achieved. That's why diversity matters to HS2. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Hard acts to follow, and I'm someone who's standing in at the last minute, so you can imagine how I'm feeling right now. Very jealous of some of the things you've heard about from HS2. I think our perspectives are slightly different. First of all, I work for an organisation that spends most of its time cutting down trees. So we've certainly got something in conflict there. But I do think we come from a perspective of an organisation that has existed in a sector that's been going over 150 years and relies on established relationships with our suppliers, and many of whom were in the same position as the SME you saw there, have no idea around diversity and inclusion, but they already have a contract with us. So what we have to do is act stealthily in terms of our relation and try and get them on board. So what I'm going to sort of give you a flavour of in this short 10 minutes is just to give you an overview of who we are, and I'm going to use a film for that because Mark has demonstrated quite adequately that films go down well. So I'm going to use a film to tell you about Network Rail. I'm going to just describe some of the levers that we're using in procurement, and they're not going to be the same levers that Mark is using. They're much more around this stealthy partnership type approach that I've talked about. And then specifically, I'm going to describe how we use those levers to impact on skills, on training, and on diversity, inclusion, and safety, because we very much pitch diversity and inclusion as a key driver of safety. But I'm also going to be honest and tell you what more we need to and can do. So first of all, who are we?
At Network Rail, we own, manage and develop Britain's railway infrastructure. That's 20,000 miles of track, tunnels, level crossings, 40,000 bridges and viaducts, and some of Britain's biggest, busiest stations. But our responsibilities and commitments go beyond that. The railway in Britain has a proud history. It is also the fastest growing, safest railway in Europe, and an efficient, green and reliable railway is at the heart of a modern, dynamic and progressive Britain. That's why we're investing hugely in the biggest programme of rail modernisation since the Victorian era. We're not only upgrading the railway infrastructure, but developing digital technology to enable faster, closer running and more reliable trains. Our work will ensure British industry continues to thrive, enabling economic regeneration through investment, bringing people and business together, and transporting millions of tonnes of goods every year. For us, it's not just about more rails, trains, signals and stations. Our work is about making a real difference to people's lives. We take care to work with local communities, sharing what we're doing and how it will improve the railway near them. Our vision is a better railway for a better Britain. We're delivering a railway that's safer, more reliable and more efficient than ever before. That will act as a foundation of our successful, sustainable economy, delivering the best possible service to all our customers.
So that does give you a flavour, I think, of the scale and scope of the work that we do. So what levers can we use in procurement? Recognising that we're working with established suppliers, with many of them with long-term contracts. We sort of take an internal and an external perspective to this, because there are some things that we can drive and there are some things that we rely on external stakeholders to support us with. So internally, clearly, as in most organisations, well, every organisation that really engages a supply chain, we do have a pre-qualification questionnaire process. And leading on from that, then it gives a scope in our invitation to tender to set the scope. And now, I think partly because of the work that Mark's been doing and the work that David's been doing, there's a greater expectation on the part of suppliers and an easier role for us to include diversity and inclusion requirements in those two processes. Now, we operate a principal contractors license scheme. Many of the suppliers that will work for Mark and work for David also work for us. Many of them hold a principal contractors license. They need that in order to operate on the railway safely. And the requirements for that license include diversity and inclusion obligations. And of course, once people have a contract with us, we can start to introduce contract clauses, recognizing that we too are a public sector body with requirements of our own that we need our suppliers to help us meet. We have our own diversity and inclusion strategy. It's called the Everyone Strategy, and it does include objectives, corporate objectives around engagement with contractors and suppliers. None of this would be possible without engaged leadership. People at the same quality as Mark and David are engaged in our organisation too. Our CEO, Mark Kahn, recently publicly made a commitment to increasing our gender diversity significantly, and also to end a practice that's over 170 years old, which is that our workers on trackside have no access to toilets. Can you imagine what that's like, going to a work environment where there are no toilets? Can you imagine what practices, therefore, have been in place for 170 years? That's something that Mark Kahn has committed to addressing by 2019, which is a huge commitment given the tradition that's involved there. We're also heavily involved in the infrastructure that people access as passengers, and therefore, when we work with contractors, we need them to come on board with our inclusive design principles. The places that we build and the places that we contract to have built must be accessible. It's a fundamental requirement for us going forward. Externally, the people who drive the activity that we're talking about will be the Department of Transport. They have the skills strategy that both David and I are obliged to meet the objectives of. There's an organisation called the Rail Delivery Group, which is a collective of all the partners involved in delivering railways in the UK, and they also set strategy and policy. The Rail Safety Standards Board, RSSB, have a scheme called the Rail Industry Supplier Qualification Scheme, or RISCs as it's commonly known, and that requires contractors to go through a sort of assessment in the same way that Mark described, an accreditation that proves to us that they're fit to work with us. And lastly, the Office of Rail and Road is a governance body that basically holds us to account. If we're not doing what we should, what we said and what we committed to, then they will come down on us very hard. So how do we impact on skills? We have a safety culture. We have to have a safety culture. It's such a dangerous environment, as you can imagine. And therefore, building equality, diversity, and inclusion activities in that culture can help create an environment where we look out for each other. And that's a key driver for us. We actually sell it on that basis. I'll look out for you, and you look out for me, irrespective of any biases or differences that we might have. We're responsible in terms of security and access to the railway, because you can imagine it's a vulnerable place. If someone wanted to do great damage to the UK, the railway would be a good place to start for them. And therefore, accessing the railway is within our gift. We manage the Sentinel scheme, which only people who are accredited can obtain a license for, and therefore access the track legally. We work in partnership with the National Skills Academy for Rail, in terms of setting standards for training, and we oblige our suppliers to buy into that partnership. And we have a number of upskilling and qualifications frameworks that people have to meet, safety standards, etc., before they can work with us. In terms of training around diversity and inclusion in particular, we run an inclusive leadership program. It's run by consultants, it's an external body of experts, and we offer that to our suppliers to attend as well. And increasingly, some of our suppliers are actually taking that program as a whole and running it throughout their business. We also offer to our people something called the Everyone Learning Program, which increasingly we're offering to our suppliers, and a number of them have taken up, and a number of our partners have taken it up too. The other thing that we can do is actually set the scene around training delivery. Because we have this relationship with the National Skills Academy for Rail, we can set guidance around inclusive training. So making sure that everyone can access learning and delivery appropriately, and that's something that's being rolled out across the industry too. So what about diversity and inclusion per se? Well, David and I, we both work with the Royal Academy for Engineering. There is a diversity leadership group that David sits on, and I sit on a procurement subgroup, which is trying to engender some idea of consistency, so that if a contractor works with us, they know what we want, and it will be very similar to what Mark wants and what David wants. And I think that's important, because otherwise, why would a contractor invest in developing people if it was only for a short period and then we were going to ask something completely different of them? So there is this drive for consistency. We also have a relationship with the Track Safety Alliance, which is a group of suppliers who come together specifically to drive safety. I also sit on a steering group of something called the Fairness, Inclusion and Respect body, which is a CITB-funded program. It's actually a free toolkit. Any supplier can access it. I'd encourage you to Google FIR, Fairness, Inclusion, Respect, to access that toolkit. We do a lot of work with social enterprises to try and drive supplier diversity. In particular, I work with an organisation that supports refugees. An interesting Deloitte's published a report today about the plight of refugees who are skilled. And lastly, as a public body, we have to assess the impact of our work in meeting the public sector duty, and therefore we expose our suppliers to something called a diversity impact assessment process so that they're on board with us. And all of this is important because engaging employees is essential to creating that inclusive environment, the high-performing environment with fair cultures that I said that we were striving for. Lastly then for me, what else can we do? We know we can do much more about consistency, both internally We'll have some parts of Network Rail asking suppliers to do one thing and another asking something else, but also externally with our colleagues to make sure that we're asking the same things. We have 100,000 people who do stuff on our behalf every year. We really ought to be influencing the way that they work and what they do. We must do much more around Black, Asian, minority, ethnic people and female progression and retention and recruitment. And lastly, a lot of our people have no access to computers. So relying on a computer program to roll out learning is never going to work. And we're struggling at the moment to try and influence and get access to those people. So whistle stop tour. Have a safe and wonderful day.